Mark, can you give me permission from your end to share my screen?
Absolutely. Let me do that for you right now.
Great. Oh, it looks like we have some new people coming in.
Yeah, people are coming in.
Yeah. Do we want to wait a couple minutes, Mark, to just give some time for people to trickle in?
You know what? It's 11:13. We have a few people waiting. Why don't we start? And then I really like your idea about breaking it up so that people can ask questions in between, and that'll probably give us more time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and move into the present mode. Let's see here. Slideshow and play from start. Oops. Okay, can everybody see that well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So, hello.
Yep, I can see.
Great. Mark, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to share what I've learned. So my name is Rebecca and I'm from Los Angeles and I'm 25 years old and I'm autistic. When I was younger, I think everyone kind of thought I was a little bit different. You know, I like to listen to the same things over and over again, and I was very sensitive to my environment. Changes in routine were not okay. I'm sure all those types of things sound familiar to you guys. But the words that we were given at the time were shy, anxious, and very sensitive. And everything else was just kind of coined as a fun little Becca thing. It wasn't until I was 22 that I found out I actually had autism. And when I found that out, it was like putting on glasses for the first time after seeing blurry my whole life. I found it was really helpful because learning about my diagnosis gave me the tools and the words to describe what was going on and to advocate for myself and for other people. So that brings me here. I work at a place called Leaps and Bounds. It's an organization that has therapeutic and recreational programs for people with autism and other developmental disabilities. And there I work one-on-one with clients as well as provide trainings for faculty and staff on autism awareness and sensitivity. Okay, so let's see here. So that's a little bit about me. I've been working with autistic people since high school. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and I'm starting graduate school for occupational therapy in the fall. Okay, so first we're going to talk about anxiety, sensory processing, and autism. So as most of you guys probably know, autistic people have sensory processing systems that are extra sensitive. So we're going to go through each of them individually and kind of talk about what it looks like to be dysregulated in the different sensory systems and how we can help and other things like that. So we'll start off with the visual system. Visual is what we see. The second sensory system is auditory, which is what we hear. The third sensory system is olfactory, which is what we smell. The fourth sensory system is gustatory, that's what we taste. And the fifth sensory system is tactile, which is what we touch. Now, there are three other sensory systems that tend to be less often discussed. And so we'll go into those with more detail in a little bit. So the first one is the vestibular system, that's balance. The second one is proprioception, that tells you where your body is in space. And the third one that's least commonly discussed is interoception, which is your internal body feelings. All right. Okay, so sensory processing differences. Autistic people tend to process the sensory environment differently. Oftentimes, sensory input can be magnified. For example, the lights are too bright. It can be minimized. For example, I didn't notice I skinned my knee. And it can be jumbled up, which is also known as synesthesia. Some examples of synesthesia are the sounds are too colorful. So basically what that means is you're getting sensory input from one source. So for example, you're hearing something, but then your brain processes it as something that you're seeing. So sensory input can feel confusing, overwhelming, painful, and great under the right circumstances. Oftentimes, sensory processing differences can also look like behavioral issues. For example, say you have a kid who's waiting for their turn on the swing set, and they start having what looks like a behavioral situation. Maybe they're having a meltdown, or they're screaming, or they're crying, or they're um, getting all riled up. And in reality, perhaps they're watching the swing go back and forth before it's their turn, and their visual system is getting dysregulated because they're watching the swing move back and forth, and that's also affecting their vestibular system. So perhaps instead of a behavioral issue, it's actually a sensory processing overload, and as a result, they're really, really uncomfortable and maybe don't have the words to describe what's going on, but know that it's hard to watch that swing. So that's just one example of how sensory processing differences can look like behavioral issues. So when we notice different sorts of behaviors that are challenging, it's important to consider what sensory challenges could be in. Um, so just take a moment to reflect if you've ever noticed a sensory processing challenge that was maybe misunderstood as a behavioral issue. And yeah, just take a moment to think about that. That's a pretty common one. And then we'll move on. All right. So sensory processing differences can be a barrier to some essential skills. For example, paying attention. If it's too loud, it's hard to focus. Learning. If you can't focus, it's hard to learn. Emotional regulation. If you can't learn, you feel frustrated. And behaving appropriately. If you feel frustrated, you act frustrated. Um, so these are some other things to keep in mind. Sensory processing impacts our lives every day, and it's also not something that we grow out of. So it's important to just keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll get into now some things that we can do to help. Okay, so proprioception, that is the first of three of the sensory systems that are not as commonly discussed. So some general information on proprioception. There are receptors located in your muscles all over your body that detect proprioception, that tell you where your body is in space. This is the only sensory system that can't be overloaded. So when you're having a big emotion, or when other sensory systems are dysregulated, this is the one sensory system that getting input for will help with all of them. Some common challenges with proprioception include under or overestimating strength and force. So maybe you pick something up and you accidentally break it because you don't realize how strong you're holding on to it. Or confusion of where your body is in space, or coordination issues. So for example, my proprioception system is a little out of whack. So when I open my eyes and clap my hands, I can make my hands meet because I'm using my eyes as a tool to help guide me, because my proprioception system isn't as strong. But if I close my eyes and try and clap, chances are I'll miss because I don't have my backup visual sense to tell me where my body is. So oftentimes for autistic people, we depend on our other senses to tell us where our body is in space. Um, Oftentimes, understimulation in the proprioception system can feel like you're floating, burning, or generally unstable. We don't really know why the proprioception system gets understimulated or dysregulated sometimes. It can feel kind of random. But luckily, there are some things that we can do to help. So tight squeezes, big bear hugs, getting squished under a beanbag, jumping on a trampoline. These are all things that are providing impact to your muscles and sort of reminding your brain where your body is and where your different body parts are. And all these types of input can be very regulating and calming, especially if you're having a big emotion. So for example, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I like to get really tight hugs and go under a weighted blanket. And it helps me to feel more secure in my own body. Um, all right. The next sensory system that is not as commonly discussed is the vestibular system. So this is the sensory system that tells you about balance. Some common challenges with the vestibular system include walking up and down stairs, jumping too high on a trampoline, going upside down, big swings, and spinning. Now, for people who are understimulated in the vestibular system, all these things can actually be very regulating to your body and to your sensory system. For people who are whose vestibular system is very sensitive and who have a hard time with sensory input, with vestibular sensory input, um, these things can be very dysregulating and cause like almost a panic reaction because you don't realize where your body is in space, and you don't know what's going on, and it can feel really scary. So with autistic people, like I know for me, it was always helpful if I was being pushed on the swing. I liked small swings. If something was going to change, I needed to know in advance so that I could prepare myself, in terms of like where my body was moving or being picked up, things like that. I like to know ahead of time. Um, some things that we can do to help with the vestibular system are proprioceptive input. So again, that's anything that gives you impact into your muscles. So like pushing against a wall, getting a tight hug, jumping on a trampoline because that gives you input in your feet, going under a weighted blanket, things like that. Also using a swing to give you that vestibular motion can be very, very regulating. And then also taking your time on stairs. Okay. The final sensory system that tends to be misunderstood is interoception. Interoception tells you about your internal body feelings and helps us to interpret messages such as hungry, thirsty, hot, cold, tired, need to go to the bathroom, or nauseous. Um, so these systems can be very intense, or they can be so mild that we don't notice until it's too big. Like we're not picking up the precursor cues, so suddenly you're starving or you're shivering or you're overheating or having an accident, and you don't realize until it feels like a really big thing. So that can cause a lot of anxiety, especially for people who have a hard time articulating these sorts of things. It can be scary to suddenly like be about to have an accident or suddenly feel really cold or really hungry. So that's something to be aware of, especially for our younger kids. Um, so, so these things can also blend together and be difficult to label. So for example, the other day I went for a walk with my mom and it was nighttime and it was kind of cold. So I started shivering. Now, I didn't realize I was cold. I thought I was nauseous. Then and I told my mom and she pointed out that I was shivering and that maybe I was cold. So once I put a jacket on, I actually felt better. So my brain was confusing my different types of interoception cues. It was confusing being cold and being nauseous. So that is something that is pretty common with autistic people. And but luckily there are things that we can do to help. Now, I have found that for me, I realize that I'm uncomfortable, but I don't necessarily know why. And so it helps to go through a list in my head, like, are you hot? Are you cold? What's the temperature outside? When was the last time you ate? Did you sleep through the night last night? Things like that. So I can kind of go through systematically to figure out what my body is trying to tell me. For our kids who are younger or people who have challenges with speaking, it can be really helpful to provide regular routine times to do these things. So a routine of going to the bathroom, checking about the bathroom at the same time every day, and having snacks regularly, and at predictable intervals, and having a sweater available that your child sees, or um, water always available. Water is always really important. Um, Things like that. Let's see. Okay, in addition, interoception challenges can also look like behavioral issues. Oftentimes our kids are uncomfortable, or adults, and we don't know quite how to articulate it, but we know that something's going on. And for some autistic people, the only way of communicating this is through really big behaviors and emotions and things like that. So it's always a good idea to check in on these sorts of things and to keep this in mind. Okay, so with regards to sensory challenges, there are some barriers to articulating these. Many autistic people may not be able to articulate what's going on. This can be because of the nature of sensory challenges, current and body awareness. So regardless of your speaking ability, it can be hard to figure out what's going on inside your body. So like, for example, if I'm in a chaotic environment, I know that I feel uncomfortable, but I can't quite always say it's because it's too loud or it's because it's too bright. Um, and so it's important so some things that we can do to help with this are to encourage body awareness and self-advocacy. So that is the best tool for navigating sensory challenges. So the way that could look is say you're with your child and there's a noise in the environment. You could say something like, "How does this noise make your ears feel?" Or say you are trying a new food, you can say, "How does this food feel in your mouth?" Um, Going through like that can encourage body awareness and help you to really become more aware of your reactions so that you can then get what you need. Because if you can't articulate what's going on, then it's hard to get your needs met. Um, for our kids who are non-speaking, it can be helpful to have different types of sensory tools on hand that you can show. So for example, sunglasses and noise canceling headphones. Even if we don't need them at the time, just knowing that they're there can make us feel more calm and more brave and more ready to get through the day because we know that we have a backup plan. Okay, so let's take a pause here. And I want to check in if anyone has questions on sensory processing.
Rebecca, I have a question. I think you did a really, really great overview of describing the sensory, the way autistic individuals process information from the environment. Is there anything that you would be able to recommend to some school members that we have here with us, along with parents, in terms of if, let's say, some of the students may be more nonverbal or have less language,
Mhm.
what they could do to support that because, because of your experience also in the ABA program. So maybe
Uh-huh.
some thoughts that happen in the ABA classroom that, we could take away to support in the home or classroom.
Absolutely. Okay, so for everybody, regardless of verbal ability, I think it's important to have those tools on hand. So headphones, sunglasses, regular scheduled intervals of going to the bathroom and getting water and having snacks. Generally speaking, keeping lights as dim as possible is helpful for most people. Keeping noises down, having access to things like bean bags that you can be squished under. Um, let's see. Um, what Another thing that I've noticed that has been really helpful is throughout the day we have sensory calming breaks where we turn off all the lights, we get out our bean bags and we play really calming, gentle music softly, and let kids do what they need to do to regulate themselves. One of the biggest things that is actually necessary, we'll get more into that in a little bit, is stimming. And we don't want to stop that ever. We want to let autistic people stim. I'll describe this more in detail later, but for those of you who don't know what stimming means, it's self-stimulatory behavior. So like hand flapping or rocking or watching the same thing over and over again, any of those sorts of self-regulatory strategies are really necessary in order to get through the day as an autistic person. And so not stopping that unless it's hurting um, themselves or someone else. And I'll get into more detail about how those sorts of situations can be navigated in a little bit.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So in early intervention, that those stimming, some of those stimming behaviors were taught as they were inappropriate behavior, like flapping hands in public, as opposed to being around typical people. That
Yeah.
flapping hands in public is not a typical behavior. So we tend to tell our son not to do those things, or rocking in public. But one, because he can bang his head, like you said, so long as they're not hurting themselves, try to stop it. But he understands not to do it. But you're
Uh-huh.
saying that it's bad. It's bad. It's
Yeah.
not good to stop. Go ahead.
So that's a great question, and I'm really glad you brought that up. So in the past, it was encouraged for people to stop the stims, especially in public, because it would make kids look different and stand out, and provided more opportunities to be bullied and made fun of and all that kind of stuff. But what we're learning in more recent research is that when we don't let those feelings out, it ends up building inside until it becomes, over time, it turns into depression, anxiety, and all those sorts of mental health challenges that are not so good. So, what we're learning with current research is that it's actually healthier in the long run to let those stims out. Now, it also depends, it depends on the situation. Each situation is different, but if your child is aware of that he's different, and that which most people are, most autistic people know that they're different, even if they're not told about their diagnosis. We know, we have a feeling, starting from when we're very young. Being able to have a conversation with him about, okay, people might not understand what you're doing or why, and that's okay. That's their problem, not yours. Um, and depending, like, if he's in a mainstream classroom, is he in a mainstream classroom or is he in a special ed classroom?
He's in district. He's in what we call D75 in New York.
Uh huh.
He goes to Helen Keller, but
Uh-huh.
He's nonverbal, and it's hard sometimes for him to understand what we're saying, and
Yeah.
for us to understand how he's feeling or what his needs are.
Yes, that is a great point, and we're actually going to talk a lot more about those sorts of challenges in a little bit. But generally, the general rule now is that you let kids stim when they need to stim, unless it becomes injurious, and or hurting somebody else. And at that point, like once it becomes, where it's dangerous, that's when his abilities to regulate himself aren't working. So that's when his coping strategies, so stimming, rocking, all that kind of stuff, have his dysregulation has exceeded those coping strategies. So in that case, that's when he's going to need some help from somebody else to regulate his body. And that is going back to proprioception. So tight squeezes, beanbag squishes, maybe sitting in a swing gently and rocking back and forth, dimming all the lights, like just go through each sensory system one by one and say, okay, how can I make this calmer in this environment?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being told, probably in a workshop or something, that you want to teach the student or child to when to stim. And so that would it be, and at what point would you teach a child to stim, maybe before going out to try to like get regulated before going out, knowing that you're getting ready to go out in public for either a meal or shopping or whatever?
Yeah. So it depends on a lot of things, right? So it depends on how disruptive the stim is. Like if the stim is contained, if it's just some rocking or flapping or, things that aren't going to, like say you have a really big stim and you're at a restaurant and it could be dangerous because you're hitting something off of the table or you're hitting somebody else with your stim, then that's something that you got to say, okay, well, we're going to have to get regulated really well before we go into that restaurant, whether it's going for a really long walk, getting exercise, anything you can do to get that energy out. And then taking the time at the restaurant to scan the environment and say, okay, what could be potential sensory dysregulation triggers? Do I need to have noise canceling headphones? Do I need to go out for a break every 10 minutes? Do I need to bring maybe a weighted lap pad, something to give you that sensory input to feel calm. If it's not hurting anybody physically, then it's better to just let it out and to sort of I have several slides on this in a little bit, but to really encourage that idea of I'm different and that's okay. And I can get through the day the way I need to get through the day. And if other people are going to judge me, then they're not going to be good friends for me. But if there are people who are open and willing to learn, then those are the kind of people that I want to be around.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Another point on that is for kids who are maybe in a neurotypical classroom, who are mainstreamed, who maybe have more access to bullying and being around those kids who really don't get it. Sitting down in the classroom, like maybe having the teacher lead something and getting the child involved too, to really build that self-confidence and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is how it feels for me. This is what we can do to help each other. Just spreads more awareness and decreases the stigma and really allows your child to get through the day regulated and mitigates that future potential for depression and anxiety and mental health challenges that are not so good. Does anyone have any other questions?
One more. my son, like I said, he's it's hard for us to communicate with him. Can
Yeah.
he actually, I mean, of course he can experience different emotions and stuff like that. I know that.
Yeah.
But can he actually get depressed and realize that he's depressed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a friend. He is non-speaking. He went through his whole childhood, adolescence, not being able to communicate with words. The only way he could communicate was through big behaviors, right? And 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 he didn't have the fine motor skills necessary to type something out on a tablet or to learn how to do that. So he didn't have any sort of AAC device like a tablet to type something out. He had a hard time with picture cards. So that was definitely a hard thing. Now, as he got older, he was a young adult and he got the finger strength, like the dexterity. That's what we call the finger muscle strength, and the hand-eye coordination and all that stuff. He got that strong enough to be able to type something out on a tablet. And the first thing that he typed out was, I've been able to understand my whole life, and my only choice was to listen. So this is actually a pretty common story. Most non-speaking autistic kids are taking everything in. Sometimes we need to simplify language. Language complexity can be hard, but we have to assume that that our kids can understand because of all of the kids who were non-speaking and then eventually were able to articulate themselves.
Rebecca, that's a great point. I think just for everyone on to remember that, sort of what we try to message out is human first, label second. And
Yeah.
the other piece to that is to remember that we all are not aware, or we may not know what the child is truly processing, and how important it is not to speak about that child in front of the child.
Exactly. And I actually have a couple book recommendations written by non-speaking people who were non-speaking kids at one point and grew up and were able to articulate things on paper. They are, one of my favorites is The Reason I Jump. It was written by a boy with a letter board. So he had a plastic laminated board, and really slowly, with a lot of help, once he got older, he was able to type out a book. And it is really beautifully written and eye-opening, and really articulate of experiences. Another book that I really like, written by a non-speaking person, is called Ido in Autism Land. It's IDO space in space Autism Land. That one's also pretty eye-opening. What I've learned from a lot of these stories is that speaking and non-speaking autistic people have a lot more in common than it may seem on the surface. Most speaking autistic people that I know can relate better to non-speaking autistic people than to neurotypical people in terms of experiences in the world.
I'm sorry, what was that second title?
Ido in Autism Land, IDO, space in, space Autism Land.
Got it, thanks.
Yeah, of course. I babysit a little boy who's non-speaking, and his parents discovered kind of recently that he was comprehending both English and Hebrew. So his parents spoke Hebrew at home. The teachers were speaking English in the classroom, and he and most people just assumed that he wasn't understanding anything because he had really big behaviors and really big stims and all that kind of stuff. And the first thing that he articulated to me like several years later was I love you. So these kids, we have to just assume that they understand and that they're taking in everything. And we really have to be careful about, like if you have to talk about your child in front of your child, like including them in the conversation as if they're part of it, even if they're not responding.
And
Thank you.
that
Good
is
advice.
really, yeah, that's really huge. When I worked as a speech pathologist in high school with children with developmentally disabilities, multiple, one of the things I learned in school, and I've had to pass it on to teachers and paraprofessionals through the years, is that you treat these kids like they understand everything you say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No matter what their expressive language ability is, and we'll get more into that later. So no matter how much language that they can express in words, we need to assume that they're understanding everything. A lot of times people with autism have a hard time getting messages from their brain to their body. So like those tests that they give to try and pick up like how much a child is understanding. Like, for example, if you give them two cards and one's yellow and one's red and you say touch red, a lot of times they're understanding what you're saying. They know you're saying that they're supposed to touch red, but it's just hard to get that message from their brain to their hand. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Like those tests don't say as much as you think they might.
That's great, Rebecca. I think we can definitely keep going because I know we have time, but this is
Okay.
great. Such great questions.
Yeah, these are really, really great questions. So I guess we'll move on to the next area, which was a perfect lead-in from our questions, which is now stimming. So stimming is defined as repetitive actions or movements that we do with our bodies. So everybody stims, people with and without autism. So some common neurotypical stims. So for just as a reminder, neurotypical means someone without autism. So some common neurotypical stims include hair twisting, finger tapping, leg shaking. People do this when they're anxious, when they're stressed, when they're excited, all that kind of stuff. Now for autistic people, stimming feels a lot bigger. Emotions feel very physical and we need to get them out of our bodies. And so some common autistic stims include hand flapping, toe walking, rocking, jumping, watching the same thing over and over, and listening to the same thing over and over again. So for example, some autistic people may have certain stims for certain emotions or reactions. And so we can use stims as a tool to figure out how our children or adults are feeling. So for example, for me, when I'm really excited, I'll start jumping, I'll start hand flapping. If my dog looks at me in a certain way, it's just so cute. I feel like I'm overloaded in my whole body and I just need to start flapping around. Now, stims can also be for more challenging emotions or fears or sensory overload. Like if I'm anxious, I'll start rocking. I like to listen to the same thing over and over again. It makes my body feel calm and regulated. I'm sure that this was the case for a lot of you guys, your kids, but I went through a phase where I listened to Let It Go from Frozen over and over again all day. And so it makes you feel like you're more stable. Like it's something that you just need it to feel calm sometimes. And so just to reiterate, like in the past, it's been taught that we want to get kids to stop stimming. But now the research is showing that it's actually necessary to let kids stim because emotions and feelings in autistic people are so physical that they just need to come out of our bodies. Um, and 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 that's the case unless it's hurting themselves or someone else. So if you have a stim that has gotten out of control, say it's head banging or biting or pinching, self-injurious behavior or hitting somebody else or yourself, that's a sign that your personal coping strategies inside your body are not enough to regulate your big feelings or sensory overload or dysregulation. So that's when you need some help. That's when you need someone to give you a really tight hug or to give you like a muscle squeeze, because that's giving you proprioceptive input, or to get you in a swing. I have a sensory swing. It's like a cloth lycra swing that hugs me. It's common in OT clinics, but if you Google sensory swing, then you'll see it come up. And it just gives me a really tight squeeze and I can swing back and forth and it helps my body to calm down. So if you have a child who's prone to those sorts of stims that can be dangerous, then you want to start looking for the precursor stims that are showing that they're getting up and up and up. So for example, maybe they're starting to rock and you say, okay, they're starting to get dysregulated, something's going on. And then they're rocking faster and more intensely. And then that's a sign, okay, what can we do to get regulated before the stim gets out of control? Can we turn the lights off? Can we do a big tight squeeze for a while? Can we just sit in a corner? Sometimes sitting in a little corner feels very calming. Small spaces are good. Going under a weighted blanket, going under a mountain of bean bags, getting rolled up really tightly in a blanket like a burrito, any of these things to get that sensory, that proprioceptive input into your muscles before you get so dysregulated that it's out of control.
All right, so wait. I'm confusing stimming with meltdown.
Okay,
So
that's a great question.
stimming, hold on one second. Stimming is sometimes I think my son's stimming is actually behaviors that he enjoys it. He's right. It's like he's getting whatever it is that's in his body out.
Yep.
So I tell him to stop or whatever, but a meltdown, it turns into a meltdown later.
So
right?
yes, so stimming can be okay. So stimming is separate from a meltdown. So stimming is a body regulation strategy. So rocking, hand flapping, all those kinds of things. A meltdown is more of an emotional experience. It's a sign that things are too much and it's out of control. Stimming, observing stims can be a tool to figure out what's going on in the meltdown department or in the emotional department. In general, stims are a really good thing. We don't want to stop them. It's only when they hit the head banging, the things like that, the biting, that's when we're going to need outside help to help us calm down our bodies. A meltdown, on the other hand, is an emotional experience that's caused by too much sensory input or demands that don't make sense or too many changes in routine or something that was expected that isn't happening anymore. Say you're going to the ice cream store and you really want to get your one flavor and then that flavor isn't there. That is something that you were expecting and you were ready for, and then and that was like what your brain was ready for, and then when it wasn't there, that can be really hard. Other changes too, like if somebody gets a haircut, that can be a little stressful because suddenly this person who you started feeling comfortable with looks different. So as much as we can, we want to prepare for these sorts of things, like even if your child isn't speaking, having that conversation anyway, because we have to assume that these kids are taking everything in because of what adults have articulated to us. And so And so really preparing for potential changes or going through the schedule of the day as much as you can. We call it priming. So for example, like say you're waking up in the morning and you're getting ready for school, you start going through the schedule, like first we're going to get out of bed, then we're going to put on clothes, then we're going potty. Okay, now like once it's time to put on clothes, then you can say, okay, we're all done putting on clothes, we're going to go potty, and then we're going to go have breakfast, and then like just keep going throughout the day to provide us with like a structure for what we can expect. Can really help with meltdowns too. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Great.
But it leads to a bunch of other questions that we don't have enough time.
Well, Mr. Navarro, if you like, and I apologize that you didn't get a chance to meet me at the beginning. My name is Mark Corallo. I work at the Office of Autism at District 75. So at the end of the presentation, if there are any specifics that you have, we could definitely kind of address any specifics that you may need then, and or we could follow up in other ways to support you.
Exactly. And we'll have a nice long question and answer session at the end too.
Okay, thanks.
Of course. Does anyone have any other questions while we're here?
Rebecca, I think the only question that, well, I'm sure there's a gazillion, and you're doing such a great job explaining everything. I think, and I really like the questions that Mr. Navarro is asking because it's so needed for parents.
Yeah.
I think sometimes what we see more or less, and you and I were discussing this before, we see it in a lot of our classrooms. Like, so I think one piece of advice for a lot of parents, for educators, is that we have to remember to manage our own behaviors and emotions in order to be able to understand what the behaviors are or what that child is trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece is because we've been talking about stereotypies and sensory processing. So I think the one thing that we see more often than not is the hands quiet, sort of you need to listen and not stim while instruction is happening. So could you give us a little bit, because I know there's different philosophies and approaches and viewpoints as to, and I think it might also be student specific.
Yeah.
But if you could, elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, definitely. So going back to your first point, autistic people are very empathetic, but oftentimes we don't show it in the same way as neurotypical people. And because of that, we're taking in all of your emotions. So if I'm around someone who's having a big feeling like anxiety, stress, whatever, I feel it too. So that it's really important when you're with autistic people to make sure that you're taking time to take care of your own emotions and make sure that you feel calm, and so that everyone can feel more regulated and ready for the day. So self-care is it's necessary. Okay, in terms of quiet hands and focusing and all that jazz. Now, for many autistic people, we need to move in order to focus. So if I'm spending all of my brain energy on trying to keep my body still in the way that the teacher is telling me to, then I'm not taking in anything else that the teacher is trying to tell me because I'm focused so much on keeping my body still. My body naturally needs to move in order to regulate itself and take things in. Now, there are some kids who, and I know I'm using the word kids a lot, but this is for all ages. We don't grow out of autism. Like sometimes the symptoms shift and change, but this is applicable to all ages. So for some people, when the body movements can become distracting, and so in those situations, maybe there are alternative body movements that are less distracting. So for example, if a kid's having a hard time paying attention, instead of saying quiet hands, try giving the instructions with them sitting on one of those workout balls that are a little bouncy. They are getting that vestibular input because their body is bouncing up and down a little bit. And so that's regulating their sensory system. And then they don't have the need to stim as much and use those stims that can be distracting, and then they can pay attention. So instead, when you say quiet hands, you're not addressing the underlying like cause for the stimming. As opposed to if you address the sensory needs, so that stimming isn't as necessary, then that solves the problem of having a hard time focusing, and it allows things to be like taken in. Does that make sense?
100%. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a great question, Mark. Okay, so stimming. Why do we stim? Stimming is a natural tool for self-regulation. Some common causes for stimming include emotions. They can be pleasant, like happy, or unpleasant, like angry, sensory dysregulation, and thoughts or memories. So, for example, if I'm going about my day and I have an anxious thought, then maybe I'll like get kind of jumpy, or I'll start flapping a little bit. And that's not something that people can see or like understand the cause of outside of my brain unless I tell them that that's what was causing the stim. So it's so stims aren't always something that we can understand the trigger of, especially for our kids who are non-speaking. Also, sensory dysregulation can be a cause for stimming. So like, for example, if it's too loud, if it's too bright, any of those sorts of things, stimming can help us stay regulated. A lot of us also stim when we're happy, and it's a good feeling. It's like, if you've ever heard the term jumping for joy, we actually do jump for joy if we're autistic. So it's sort of a physical manifestation of our emotions that needs to come out in order to get through the emotion. And it can feel really good and calming too. So it's just it's an important thing to keep in mind and encourage, and to have conversations about, for our speaking and our non-speaking kids, to still articulate things like, you're different and that's okay. This is what you need to do to regulate your body, and that's okay. Um, there are people in the world who are mean and they are not open to understanding, and those aren't such good friend choices. But there are also people who are warm and open and want to learn, and those are the people that we as a family want to be around. So that's important to articulate both with our speaking and our non-speaking kids, because most of us are taking this stuff in. Let's see here. For kids who are in a situation with bullying and things like that, maybe for our kids who are a little bit older, or our kids who have speaking abilities, you can have a conversation of like, you can choose. You can regulate your body, or you can save it for later and not be and not have to deal with the social implications of bullying. Now, unless the bullying is really, really bad, in which case the bullying needs to be addressed, it's generally better to sit down in the classroom and educate all the kids on what's going on and why stimming is necessary, because that makes it more, that normalizes it. It makes it so other kids can understand too. And and it increases the self-confidence and the overall being okay with yourself, even if you're different sort of feelings. Okay, so what can we learn from stimming? I did touch on this earlier, but just to reiterate, stimming can be a tool to figure out how someone is feeling. Some people have specific stims for specific reactions. For example, rocking could be tied to sensory dysregulation or sadness, while hand flapping could be tied to excitement or anger. Unless a stim is hurting themselves or someone else, please do not stop it because it's necessary for autistic people to self-regulate. Now, if it is hurting themselves or someone else, that's when we got to start looking at the precursor signs and symptoms that dysregulation is getting out of control, and then do things in that moment to calm things down. Maybe scan the sensory environment, give those tight squeezes, get in a swing. Anything physical is really helpful. Let's see here. All right. Does anyone have any questions, any more questions on stimming before we move on?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right, great. Masking. So masking is a term that's used to describe hiding autistic traits in order to fit in. So some examples of masking include repressing stims, telling white lies, pushing through aversive sensory input in order to fit in. Basically, it's hiding your autism and trying to copy neurotypical people so that you're not noticed. The long-term effects of this are anxiety, depression, shame, a generally confused sense of self and identity. But there are some things that we can do to help mitigate the effects of masking. One is celebrate individuality. Just reassuring people that it's okay to be different, and it's and it's okay to be you, and to not discourage stimming and other sorts of autism related characteristics. All right, so we'll move on to verbal communication. So there are two types of communication: verbal communication, expressive language and receptive language. Expressive language is what we say to others with or without words. So that's like our output. And receptive language is what we're taking in, the language that we can understand. Expressive language, so speaking ability, does not equal receptive language or listening ability. Many autistic people can understand even if they do not use words to communicate. And I know that we touched on this a bit earlier, but it is important to keep this in mind, that our kids are taking everything in, or taking a lot of things in, and we have to make sure that we're really amplifying the positives with our words and speaking with love and kindness around our kids. And when it's about autism and we're talking in front of our kids or about their behaviors or things like that, making sure we're including them in the conversation, even if they don't look like they're paying attention, or even if they don't respond verbally. Okay, so expressive language. There's a wide array of expressive language ability. Some autistic people may communicate with one-word statements. For example, mommy could mean I want my mommy, or where is my mommy, or I need a hug, because they associate hugs with their mommy. So we kind of have to be detectives to figure out, okay, what's going on. Echolalia is a term used to describe when someone repeats words or sounds that they've heard before. It can be immediate, like if you ask a question and they just repeat the question, or it can be delayed. And this is, and sorry, an example of delayed is like when someone starts scripting a TV show or a movie, like starts saying what they heard from the show or the movie. Now, this is the research that's coming in now is showing that echolalia is a really important part of language development. So we don't want to stop it. There are different functions for echolalia. So for example, if you present a question and your child responds by repeating your question, a function of that type of echolalia could be helping them keep it in short-term memory while they're thinking of an answer. Another function could be making sure that they got the question correctly. A lot of times our kids have processing delays. So when we repeat it, it helps us keep the question in our memory while we're processing what the question is. With delayed echolalia, so things like movie scripts and TV scripts and maybe repeating conversations, some functions of that could include anxiety regulation. So maybe it's a show that's really calming and you need to keep going through it in order to calm yourself down. It's a self-regulation strategy that works really well. Another function of delayed echolalia could be communication. So, for example, there's a documentary called Life Animated, and it's about a young man who only communicated with echolalia his entire life, and it was just Disney scripts. So he would script Disney movies throughout the day. And once he got older, his parents were watching some Disney movies with him and realized that when he was scripting different parts of the Disney movie, he was communicating something, and they figured out what he was communicating based on the context of the movie. So like if he was trying to tell them that he was feeling sad, he would script a part of a Disney movie where the character was feeling sad. If he was hungry, he would script a part of the movie where like maybe they were having a meal. So things like that. And so this documentary was really eye-opening and incredible and really puts a new perspective on echolalia and communication. A lot of times people view echolalia as something that's not functional and has to be gotten rid of. But it's actually a really great tool for developing language and for communicating or for holding something in your brain or for calming yourself down. So this is something that we want to encourage and even get involved with. So if a kid is scripting a show, or saying the same thing over and over again, or listening to a song and repeating it, then you want to get involved and say like try and banter with it a little bit, and engage with the echolalia. That provides its own sense of connection too. Does anyone have any questions on this?
Nope, I think it's great. I think I love that you said it's great for therapists and parents to hear as well. Like if a child is demonstrating any form of echolalia or a scripted TV show, you know, how to make it as engaging and meaningful as possible in order to connect to the child. I think it's a great therapeutic strategy that a lot of therapists and teachers and parents can use to build on the development of language.
Exactly. It's really great.
Hello, everyone. I would like to ask a question.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I love the presentation, very informative. I would like to ask him, because my daughter does this, whenever she comes back from school, whatever she hears from there or what she learns, she comes back home and starts repeating everything. Is that part of a delayed echolalia?
That is delayed echolalia, and I would guess that that's a tool for her to say, hey, mom, this is what I did today. I want to tell you about my day. Or reprocessing the day and saying, okay, that was a big day, time to go through it and calm down a little bit. It's really a great tool and a great strategy to connect with the people that she's telling about her day, or to just decompress after the day.
Did that answer the question for you?
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Welcome. Okay, so receptive language is unrelated to expressive language ability. So again, receptive language is the language that we're taking in and understanding, as opposed to the language that we're speaking. And so regardless of the language that we're able to speak, we must assume that autistic people can understand what we're saying. So just to reiterate, when you're talking about your kids in front of your kids, try to include them in the conversation as much as possible. Yeah, that's this is an important one.
I wanted to add something to that that isn't directly related to ASD, but I think that that's good advice even with neurotypical children.
Absolutely.
Because I think people very often tend to assume that a child isn't listening or can't comprehend that they're the person being discussed.
Yeah.
And feels disrespectful. So
yeah,
I think it's a rule of thumb.
exactly. You know, even if it's a thing that doesn't seem like it's that big, you still want to make sure, like for all kids, just like so that because it doesn't feel good to know that someone's talking about you in front of you. So just for all kids, it's a nice rule of thumb. Thank you for adding that. Okay, so parent verbal communication. So functioning labels. We've all heard the terms low functioning and high functioning. These terms can be really hard to hear. So low functioning discounts the abilities and strengths an individual may have and is often an inaccurate assumption. So maybe you have someone who has really big challenging behaviors or they're non-speaking, but we don't really know yet what sorts of abilities and strengths they do have maybe. And oftentimes they're there, they just need to be uncovered. It also feels really bad to hear the term low functioning being described as you. So it's generally speaking, it's not so helpful. High functioning creates a hierarchy, and it discounts the deficits and supports an individual may need and the challenges or questions. So these functioning labels, they aren't so helpful. Instead, what we like to advocate for is talking about people in terms of their individual strengths and support needs. So that not only is more specific and helpful, but it's also less emotional. It keeps everything very simple. These are our challenges. These are what support needs we have, and these are our strengths. As opposed to putting the people in these two kind of harsh categories. Another thing that functioning labels does is it perpetuates the idea that autism is linear. So I really like this chart. It's from the ICANN network, which is an autism organization in Australia. And so they have this one. The first side is less autistic to more autistic, which is inaccurate. What autism is, what's a more accurate depiction of autism is the second part, which is where each autistic trait can be more or less intense. So that's just something to keep in mind. Does anyone have questions on this stuff? All right. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind. So a lot of people have big feelings about this one. The whole autistic person versus person with autism. Autistic person is known as identity first language. And these days it tends to be preferred by autistic people because you can't separate yourself from your autism. person with autism was really encouraged in the past because people believed that it made people feel more confident because they didn't have to be attached to the autism label. I personally don't have a strong opinion either way. I think just whatever flows better in the conversation is okay. But a lot of people do have a strong opinion on this one, so it's just something to be aware of. I don't think either one is particularly harmful, as long as you're getting whatever message across that you want to get in the conversation. Okay, nonverbal communication. So eye contact. For many autistic people, eye contact can feel painful, overwhelming, violating, and anxiety provoking. This can make it hard to pay attention, listen to what's being said, remember how to respond, and self-regulate. In the past, it was often encouraged for autistic people to practice eye contact through different types of eye contact training. What they found was in the long run, this wasn't helpful because it was causing just more anxiety, and it made it harder for autistic people to pay attention to the conversation. So like, I know for me, sometimes if I'm feeling a little dysregulated or I'm with somebody who I don't know as well, or just generally anxious, if I try and make eye contact during the conversation, then I'm focusing so much on if I'm making eye contact the right way, and focusing on mitigating the sort of the like the jarring sort of, it can feel kind of jarring and painful to look in someone's eyes for a long time if you're autistic. So I'm focusing so much on those feelings that it's hard for me to pay attention to what the person I'm talking to is actually saying and to take that stuff in, and then to remember how to respond and to regulate myself. So instead, we like to suggest alternatives to show that you're paying attention. So for our kids who can speak, you can say something like, even though I'm not looking at you, I'm still listening. For our kids who are non-speaking, teaching different gestures, like if you're talking to someone, turning your body to face them, just to give a signal that they're listening, that doesn't enforce eye contact. Does anyone have any eye contact questions? All right. Okay, so literal interpretation of language. So autistic people tend to be very literal in how they interpret things. We usually interpret words at face value, which means things like sarcasm is hard. Common phrases can be hard. So it often causes miscommunication and anxiety. We can help by being mindful of the actual words that we use and to say exactly what we mean. So for example, let's take a pretend autistic person named Sam. When you say, grab a seat, Sam, what Sam is hearing is, you want me to pick up a chair? Why? So you can try instead something like sit in your chair. That's more direct, and you're saying exactly what you mean to say. There's no space for misunderstanding, things like that. Another example, if you say hi, Sam, Sam is hearing, say, hi, Sam, why would I say hi to myself? They won't let me leave until I say hi to myself. Instead, you can say something like, Sam, say, hi, Emma. That is more clear and direct in the message that you're trying to get across. And there's less room for misinterpretation and anxiety. A third example, if you say, sit still while you eat, Sam, what Sam is hearing is, I'm not supposed to move at all. I'm so stressed. How can I eat if I can't move? How can I breathe if I can't move? This is stressful. I can't follow this rule, and I want to please my mom or my dad or my teacher. I don't know what to do. And so that can be very stressful. So instead, you can say something like, stay in your seat while you eat. That's more clear and direct and definitely less stressful. Final example for a literal interpretation of language is don't interrupt me, Sam. What Sam is hearing is don't interrupt even if there's an emergency. And then maybe he's going into an anxiety, falling into an anxiety pile. Like, but what if there's a fire? What if something's happening and I need to tell you, but you're talking to somebody? So in that situation, you can introduce levels of severity. Like maybe for a neutral comment, you can wait, but for an emergency, it's okay to interrupt. And finally, autism and shame. So it can be hard to be different, and that can make you feel bad about yourself. I found for me looking at autism through different perspectives has been helpful. Two of the most common perspectives are as follows. So there's the medical model, which is a misnomer. This is about perspective taking and ways of viewing disability, not about medicine. So the medical model for viewing autism, it sees autism as a set of differences or problems that need to be fixed or cured. Um, I think that what's more helpful is looking through the lens of neurodiversity, which encourages you to ask questions like, what tools does this child need to thrive in a society with social and behavioral expectations, as well as sensory environments that were not created for them? So, shifting your perspective can help to open things up and to see things in more of a positive light, and to make everybody feel better about themselves, increase self-confidence, and decrease shame. Kids pick up shame, like when parents are having big feelings, then kids pick that up too. And so it's important to reframe how we see these sorts of things. And finally, so there are a lot of words people use to describe us. I've heard some examples are disabled, differently abled, special needs. But regardless of what you call it, people with disabilities each have their own set of strengths, challenges, support needs, and accommodations. When we spend so much time looking for words to make disability seem softer, we create shame around having a disability. Instead, celebrate individuality. Everyone brings something different to this world. And that's all.
Rebecca, this was absolutely fantastic. We cannot thank you enough for taking the time to educate us. You know, we all work in the field of education. And as I had said earlier, we have parents here, we have school administrators here, you know, the Office of Autism is here, and we really want to take the time to thank you for continuing to educate us. It's so very much needed. And I want to thank you for your patience and for the allowance of questions. I know, you know, whether we're a parent or an educator, we're always thinking about the children that we either have or work with and what we could do to better support them. So I know we're at the end of the presentation now. So, and I know that there were questions that were kind of being put on hold. So I'm going to drop my information into the chat so that if parents want to reach out further so that they know who our office is and how we can provide supports, I'm going to do that. And then if there are any specific questions for Rebecca before we wrap up, please drop them, you know, please let us know and we can go ahead and ask.
Great. I have plenty of time, so don't be afraid to ask.
Okay.
Thank you both, guys. It was very informative.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. And we will certainly, I'm going to put in my email now for everyone so that you have it in case you want to reach out. Rebecca is gracious enough to say that she would do this again.
I would love to.
And we
Um,
really appreciate that, Rebecca.
yeah.
And again, it's just about more and more learning and helping families understand their child and how we can all work together to best support them. And thank you, Vinette, and thank you, Matt, for being here. Vinette is a school principal and Matt is a speech supervisor. So thank you both. Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Would you be able to share the the slideshow?
Yes, I have it, and I can definitely, I have everyone who attended today. Rebecca, do you have it? Is it in a Google Drive or anything with a link that we could drop into the chat? Or if not, I can just message it out. Like, what's easier?
I have a PDF downloadable. So I believe I sent that to you.
I have it, so I can, if
We
you
have
like,
it, and I just want to say I'm going to post it on our website,
on our website.
the
Yes.
Office of Autism, which I'm going to give you the URL right now.
You are the best, Julene. Okay, great. Yeah, this recording will be on our website, and that will give you some information. And I want to thank Rebecca's dad for being here and being so supportive. Thank you for allowing this opportunity. We really, really appreciate it.
Mark, it looks like my mom got in too. She's
Awesome. So we want to thank your mom as well. That's awesome. And Julene's going to drop the URL. Julene, do you have it, or do you want me to do it? I could type it in really quickly.
I'm using my phone, so it's taking me a
No
minute.
problem. I have it right here. I'm on the MacBook. There we go. Okay, so it's www.D75Officeofautism.com. And there are links there. We continuously work on updating it. Julene is our social worker extraordinaire / graphic artist who keeps us on point. But Rebecca, we would love to continue a relationship with you and to really thank you for your support and your work and advocacy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
everyone.
you so
Wish
much.
you all a great day, and thank you so much again for coming.
Thank you. Have
Okay,
a good
take care, everyone.
afternoon.
Coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Bye. It was wonderful.
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
was very informative.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rebecca, again. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jackie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone.